Welcome to the Daily Download. I'm Travis Fain, and today's conversation is about two families torn apart by drugs. Kevin Cumming died in November of 2018. He was 18 years old, and he overdosed on fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid used legitimately as pain medication around the world, but it's extremely powerful, often counterfeited, pretty cheap to make, and it gets cut in with the illegal drugs that are on the street with unpredictable results. Something like this story happens 150 times a day in this country, according to the CDC. That's how many opioid overdoses we have in this country. But what makes this story different is what happened in an Orange County courtroom last week. And that's where I want to bring in Monica Casey. Monica, thanks for being here today.
Thanks.
So you cover Durham and Orange County in that area for WRAL. You were in the courtroom last week when this case came forward. Set the scene a little bit. Take us there.
In the courtroom last week, this was a sentencing hearing for a plea deal. So there were not a lot of people in the courtroom, but there was definitely a lot of emotion in that room. You had the stepmother and father of Kevin Cummings, and his mother was there. You also had Nathan Wyndham, the man who was pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter, as well as 2 drug charges, his wife, his mother, and his defense team. The stepmother and the father gave a victim impact statement that was incredibly powerful. There were a lot of tears from them. The stepmother described Kevin Cummings as an intelligent and athletic young man who was battling dark demons, was her phrasing. He had been in and out of certain rehab programs, but she says he was getting his life back on track. She described a situation of a birthday weekend for her stepson, but when Monday morning came, his father found him dead in his room. She told a really heartbreaking story of trying to revive her stepson, but knowing that he was gone. They gave the first statement, and then the mother stepped up, and she had baby photos of Kevin Cummings that she was showing to the defendant. She was crying throughout most of her statement, as was the defense attorney and the defendant, which is something I think you don't see very much in a courtroom like that. It was just a lot of emotion with that. Kevin Cummings and Nathan Wyndham had met in jail, and they had agreed to trade drugs. Kevin was going to get Nathan marijuana, whereas Nathan was going to get Kevin heroin, but that heroin was laced with fentanyl, and Kevin overdosed on that and died in November of 2018.
Yeah, and I think fentanyl is something like 50 times stronger than heroin. So that kind of goes into why it's so unpredictable when it gets mixed in with these other drugs. It's a synthetic opioid and much stronger. You know, this kid, Kevin, from your story, 1,400 on the SAT, had 3 college scholarships on the table, but just couldn't get past the addiction in his life, the demons in his life, and met Wyndham kind of happenstance. They just happened to be in a cell together or in jail together, right?
Yeah, the mother called it a perfect storm because Kevin had been struggling with these issues for a while, and there was an incident of the charge was simple assault. He threw food at her or something like that in their home and kind of destroyed the house. She agreed for the judge to put him in jail for 10 days while she took that time to search for a new rehab facility. And this was before North Carolina had passed the raise the age legislation. And so Kevin was charged as an adult for that, and he was placed with adults. And that's where he met Nathan Wyndham. And so his mother points out that had that law been passed, Kevin never would have met Nathan. And that's something she carries to this day.
Yeah, and you see this not just with juveniles, but kind of over and over again in the system where someone's real problem is drugs or it's mental illness, which are often the exact same thing. And there's just nowhere particularly quickly to put them when they're lashing out at people they may love. And so they end up in jail. And then that is a great and terrible place to kind of learn more about a criminal lifestyle because you meet other people who are there and things become a little more normal to you that you normally would not accept in your life. So a real tragedy. Tell us, on the day of the sentencing, tell us what Kevin's family kind of stood up and said and the moment that really was the gut punch of this story.
And One thing I want to highlight as well is the defense attorney for the defendant, after Kevin's family spoke about their son and the life he had ahead of him. He had 3 college scholarships on the table. He was an all-star athlete. The defense attorney turned around and said to the family, "Thank you for your words. Addiction affects all of us." And he told a really personal story of his family and their struggles with addiction for some of his children. And he turned back to the judge and he said, "In 49 years practicing, I've never spoken to a family like that." But it was just that emotional. Nathan Wyndham also read a letter to the family apologizing. And it was that letter coupled with the defense attorney's information to the judge about the work that Wyndham and his wife have been doing in the addiction recovery community in Orange County that really flipped a switch for Christy Barker Cummings, Kevin's mother. Wyndham was ordered to report to jail Friday of that week, a couple days after the sentencing, and so he was going to be leaving the courtroom with his family. His wife came up to Barker Cummings and was apologizing and hugging her, and then Wyndham came up, and Christy Barker Cummings embraced him with open arms. Both were crying, and she told him, "I forgive you. I forgive you for this."
Yeah, and forgiveness is a powerful thing, and that was what really struck me about this story, was her realizing that the only path forward, the best path forward, was to forgive.
Definitely, and it was something we talked more about in our interview afterwards, but she told me she didn't realize how much she was carrying until that moment when she made that choice to forgive Nathan Wyndham.
Yeah, Nathan Wyndham, he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, a 27 to 42-month sentence, told everybody in the courtroom that he was 18 months sober, and as you said, working with others who were struggling with drugs. A tough story. We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, I want to kind of step back a little bit, take more of a 30,000-foot view. Stick with us here, please, on the Daily Download. All right, welcome back to the Daily Download. We're with Monica Casey, who reports for us here at WRAL and focuses a lot in Durham. Monica, you're relatively new here, but you do cover a good bit of crime, unfortunately. How much of that crime is due to drugs, mental illness, both? And then what are local governments, local officials trying to do about that?
I think nationwide there's really been a shift of trying to not criminalize mental health issues, and Durham has been pretty innovative with that, in particular launching their Heart Responders program. And with that program, you would still call 911 for an issue, but the 911 operator would make the decision, does this need a police response or does this need a mental health professional response? And the HEART team has been operating in Durham. They're just a pilot program right now, but they've been going since June. And their most recent data showed they had not had to call for backup from police once. The situation did not turn violent. And that keeps people struggling with these mental health issues out of jail, and it gets them to the resources they need rather than being incarcerated.
Yeah, and you can see where people would be slow to accept it, because you think, well, this is a situation that is or could become inflamed. I need a police officer here to protect me. But sometimes, through no fault necessarily of the police officers, just them being there escalates it, particularly for someone who is not fully understanding what's going on around them.
Definitely. And the HEART responders, they drive a minivan, which I think a lot of people would say is not a threatening vehicle, with a little heart on the side. They wear light green T-shirts, and most importantly, they're unarmed. Sometimes people who are struggling with mental illness or have been for a long time have already had negative experiences with law enforcement simply because that was not the resources they needed at the time. And for these HEART responders, they're non-threatening, they're in plain clothes, and their appearance would hopefully not set someone off immediately the way that flashing lights and sirens could.
Right. It's a different style of interaction. I want to talk a little bit more about fentanyl. This is something that, opioids have been a scourge for decades now, but this fentanyl has really taken it up a notch. I'm sure people listening have heard of it. This state is on track for its deadliest year of overdoses ever. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner says something like almost 1,800 suspected overdose deaths, and that's from January to June, the latest statistics I could find. Back in 2021, so the year before, which was, I think, another record, something like 80% of the 3,900 overdoses reported involved fentanyl poisoning. So, I mean, this is the problem. What do authorities say either to watch out for or that we can do about this? I mean, it just seems like we cannot get on top of this problem.
I think from, in part, a parent's perspective as well as keeping an eye on the people that you love if you know someone is already struggling with addiction. And I think also knowing that this can affect anyone. I think it falls in that category sometimes with mental health as well, where you never know if this is something that you might be struggling with. One thing Kevin Cummings' mother said to me is that he was born in New York City. They were raising their children in New York, and they moved to, quote unquote, small town America, Hillsborough.
Right. Thinking they would be safer.
Exactly. Yeah. And no area is immune, and no one is immune. And for parents in particular, they say to watch your kids. The mom says, be nosy, investigate, make them talk to you, and keep an eye on what they're doing. And for someone who isn't a parent, watch your siblings, watch your friends, and watch for those changes in behavior.
And talk to them. Mm-hmm. Don't let it fester. Actually talk to them. Let them, knowledge, as we say, is, of course, the power. I pulled some signs of overdose that I think I'll just get out there for people. Small, constricted, they call them the pinpoint pupils. Mm-hmm. If someone's pupils don't look right, they fall asleep or lose consciousness. Slow, weak, no breathing, choking, gurgling, if someone's used drugs. And I mean, these all seem obvious, but I think we have this way of saying, oh, it'll be okay. Oh, it'll be, especially if we're scared to call police, right? And cold, clammy skin, discolored skin, especially in the lips and nails, and just kind of going limp. And we've changed some laws in this state to kind of make it easier for people to report drug abuse and not necessarily have to have repercussions themselves with law enforcement. And also the juvenile justice. We talked briefly about that, about how we're trying not to put young people in jail. Tell us a little bit more about that change.
Well, when Kevin Cummings was charged, he was 17, so he was automatically put with adults in that case because that was in 2018. But this juvenile justice raised the age change came in December of 2019, and it means that 16 and 17-year-olds were no longer automatically charged as adults and automatically put with adults, and I think that is definitely very important.
Yeah, I want to close here with a quote from... And I'm sorry, I don't remember if it was the mother or the stepmother, but I really thought this was the broader lesson of this story. And she was talking about Nathan Wyndham and how she came to forgive him. And, quote, "I could tell he really has remorse. I was able to let go of a lot of bitterness that I've held. I didn't know what was happening in his life, in Nathan's life. You never know someone who has wronged you, and it's hard to wrong someone more than this. You just don't know what's happening in their life, but what you might know, what you might be able to learn, to come to understand, is that the only way for you to move on in your life is to let the bitterness go and to say, I forgive you." Monica Casey, thank you so much. And thank you at home. Thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You may not have known this, but you can also listen to entire WRAL newscast in podcast form. Search WRAL Newscast in your podcast app, whichever one you use, it'll pop right up. And that feed gets updated with new newscasts multiple times per day. Thank you once again for your attention, and we hope you have a wonderful day.